What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video all about video game difficulty. Now, straight away, sorry if I sound a little bit strange here, still under the weather, but already recovering pretty quickly. Speaking of being sick though, between that and getting my teeth kicked in by a video game recently, it felt like a good time to swing back around and talk about this, as I don't believe I've made like a dedicated video about it since like 2022, and given how I've reviewed literally like 150 to 200 games since then, it seemed like an appropriate time to jump in and sort of refresh that video, because truth be told, as I do make an effort to mention difficulty at least in almost every review I make, one of the reasons I really enjoy doing that and talking about that kind of thing is that I find the concept of difficulties in video games really fascinating, both in terms of how people react to them, but also what they do mechanically. A lot of difficulties just adjust player and enemy health values, how much damage you're taking in with that health, that kind of thing. And then others take a more mechanical approach where systems and enemy designs and encounters might change. And in some cases, further still, it can drastically alter the experience in the way of something like Survival and Fallout 4 as a quick example. But either way, over the course of this video, I'm going to talk about the difficulties that apply to me, at least in terms of how I view them. The developer-intended experience, if you will, that some games without difficulties and, they kind of just have the one experience really make pretty easy to find, but others are perhaps slightly trickier to pin down, which can be further complicated by one of my own personal preferences, which is a highly customizable difficulty, like what was added to Baldur's Gate 3 post-launch. But before we go any further, personally, I'm on the side of play the game however you want. It really doesn't matter to anybody who matters to you. I'm sure there will be various enclaves of the internet that will be upset no matter what choice you make in that regard. But as I personally like to say, you deserve to enjoy the game that you paid for, which is one of the reasons I've been making reviews and trying to inform people about this stuff all these years. So if you're looking for like a correct answer, especially out of me, honestly, I don't think there is one. Just whatever you enjoy the most, and that's pretty much it. But for me, I would say video game difficulty can really be divided into two categories, which is basically knowledge-based and skill-based. So on the knowledge side of things, I would say that this applies to the vast majority of games that I play, in the sense that the difficulty is more about knowing the system and how to take advantage of it to your advantage, but thanks to things like CRPGs being seemingly primarily turn-based these days, on top of TRPGs and strategy RPGs all being pretty much your own pace of playing, these aren't really difficult in the sense that they are relying on some manner of reflexes or individual skill on your part, with maybe a slight exclusion for things like real time with pause, but even then you can pause, so it's not exactly the same. But oftentimes what these games do is make up for that lack of skill-based difficulty via things like random chance. That being the sense that you can potentially do absolutely everything perfectly, and there still might be a slight chance that it just doesn't go in your favor. And that's kind of where a lot of the difficulty in that stuff lies. Turning that random chance into measurably less random chance, but rather it being very much so in your favor to play a certain way, that kind of thing. And learning how to do that is the knowledge portion of that knowledge-based difficulty. Contrasting that, however, with skill-based difficulty, for me, this is mostly games like the kind of variety of action games that I play, and this is, typically speaking, where your knowledge and reactions against the enemy and the enemy's AI and what they are doling out to you is really what is going to drive success and push you forward through the game. And while it's easy to point to things, especially like Souls-likes, as being under this category, I don't necessarily think that's true in totality anyway, because a lot of Souls-likes are actually really forgiving once you've learned the mechanics and how to approach an enemy. In some ways, those games are more about like rote memorization and learning through failure, but they do certainly err on the side of skill-based difficulty as well, so that's very true. Now, the sort of catch to both of these is that where knowledge-based stuff is really forgiving in terms of like individual player mobility, things outside the game that could potentially hinder you, like, having to pause to see what your kid's up to, that kind of thing. It also has the hurdle of course, kind of getting people to be interested enough to learn the systems and the knowledge it is asking of you. And as somebody who has spent literally years of his life trying to make that more accessible for people, I think it's safe to say that's easier said than done. Now, on the flip side of that, skill-based stuff is more immediately accessible in the sense that it's just how quickly you can adapt to, of course, overcoming that challenge and reflexes and learning what the enemy is going to do. The catch to this is, depending on how hard you make this, or how brutal the AI is for these enemies, that kind of thing, you have the sort of opposite problem where you might push people away simply because what you're asking of that individual person is simply not something they are capable of rising to. Especially if they already had some impairment, like again, limited mobility issues, things like that. Those people are likely just never going to be able to play that game, at least in what is more than likely going to be the dev-intended experience. But of course, all of that kind of ignores the concept of various difficulty levels. Most games typically have like a story normal hard type of situation, or depending on the game, they may go and divvy it up a little bit further, like say Wrath of the Righteous. Now, believe it or not, if you haven't spent years on the internet combing through various video gaming communities, not everyone agrees that they should exist, but when they do, I do find them generally super helpful for people trying to meet whatever level of challenges that they are up for. On the knowledge side of things, it will usually curve random chance in your favor, as opposed to being fair or outright set against you. And then on the skill side of things, it usually either changes mechanics, enemy layouts, aggressiveness, or even just the damage they deal in some cases based on what level you've got it on. Now, some people don't like this because, from what I understand at least, they think that a game should be designed as a singular experience and only experienced in that way because that's what the piece of media is intended to be. And while I can appreciate the sentiment, it's not something I particularly agree with, but that does touch on something kind of interesting in and of itself, which is something I've already mentioned, which is that dev-intended experience, because more often than not, games with more than one difficulty will usually have something like normal that in some cases will just straight up tell you that it is the intended experience that they had designed, and that you could think of the other difficulties kind of as like accessibility options. Now, while this may well not matter to most people, as a reviewer, I think it matters to me a great deal because, while in my case, if something has like an achievement or something for hard mode, I'm definitely going to try for it at the very least. I'm definitely going to make an effort to do that. It doesn't always work out, like the game that I'm playing recently that, like I said, has been kicking my teeth in. But in the absence of like challenges or trials like that, what I'm typically looking for when I'm reviewing a game is what you would consider like the baseline of what that experience is going to be for most people, because it's likely what's going to resonate with people the most in a review for it. But the other side of that is games that don't actually have various levels of difficulty. They have just the one experience. Souls-likes are pretty well known for this, but we've actually seen several over the past couple of years actually experimenting with different difficulty modes, so even then it's not universal, but they are a genre where I think this particular subject comes up a lot. And for the most part, I actually think this is perfectly fine because most of the games that do this actually have tons of ways for you to overcome that challenge, outside of, again, things like potential mobility issues. And so if you're struggling, there usually is a way forward, even if it might be a little tedious at times, but that tediousness tends to be where you lose people, especially if they hit what feels like, to them, a brick wall. And that, combined with the fact that most people don't finish games to begin with, that situation puts those people at a very low chance of them actually getting through that. Which leads me finally to my own preferences, which I've already alluded to a little bit, which is basically fully customizable difficulties. I'm a big fan of games that have just an absurd number of options for you to customize for the exact experience that you are looking for. Even this, like basically everything, has its naysayers. In fact, some people think that developers should, in fact, only have the one difficulty that they've designed for and nothing else. And those people are certainly free to make their own YouTube channel and make unnecessarily long videos talking about the subject. But this particular YouTube channel happens to be mine, so we're going to focus on my preferences, which is those customizable difficulties. Much of the reason I enjoy this so much comes down in large part to the fact of the just types of games that I play. I play a lot of RPGs where getting really granular with exactly what you're experiencing can be really helpful, like with something like Wrath of the Righteous. The presets are fine, but maybe I want to get in there and mess around with the specifics of a particular thing to make it either more easy or difficult as I see fit. Maybe I just want to increase the sort of difficulty level of the various skill checks I'll be making and not necessarily the difficulty of the monsters along with it. And given that RPGs are, for the most part, really about player choice and ideal situation, I think extending that choice to the experience being as difficult or as easy as you'd like it to be is sort of just the natural fit there. And probably my favorite example to point to this is actually Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, a game I have described as both one of the easiest and most difficult CRPGs you can play because it has a bunch of different modifiers to make that game incredibly easy as a very bottom level, but at the top level, especially with things like Magran's Fires and the ultimate challenge, you can make that game enormously difficult to the point of nothing I can really think of being, at least in like the sort of knowledge-based skill type of difficulty, harder than that. It's extremely over the top. And while those are obviously two pretty big extremes, you can also play around in the middle, and then after you've beaten the game and completed, I think it's the achievements that give you the blessings that allow you to take various modifiers on further playthroughs, they've given you not only customizable difficulty options, but also a ton of incentives to mess around with them, play through the game multiple times, with things like the ultimate allowing you to participate in the wider community outside of the game itself, which is why that's kind of like my ideal scenario for that kind of thing. But perhaps as a bit of a strange baseline, I will say that the more games I have played and completed, the only correct answer is for you to be playing and having a good time, because the rest is just irrelevant, honestly. So, several years later, the main thing for me is that while I certainly love a good challenge and want to, of course, meet and overcome those obstacles, I am infinitely more concerned about whether or not I'm having a good time in that process than anything else. But either way, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. Truth be told, personally, I think it was probably a little unnecessarily long-winded, but hopefully you got something out of it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.